Namo Vishnu Braya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tiramane Namaste Saraswatum Deve Gauravani Bracharane Nirvishesha Shnunavadi Paskadyade Siddharne. So I'll try to speak slowly, so it may appear that I'm asleep, but it helps the translation. Luckily, it's only one language we're having translated. Okay, today we're reading from the Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 6, entitled Sankhya Yoga, text number 35. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Asamshayam Mahabaho Manodur Nigraham Shalam Abhyasena Dukunteya Vairagena Chagriyate. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Lord Shri Krishna said, Almighty Arm, son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The difficulty of controlling obstinate mind, as expressed by Arjuna, is accepted by the personality of Godhead. But at the same time, he suggests that by practice and detachment is possible. What is that practice? In the present age, no one can observe the strict rules and regulations of placing oneself in a sacred place, focusing the mind on the supersoul, restraining the senses and mind, observing celibacy, remaining alone, etc. By the practice of Krishna consciousness, however, one engages in 9 different types of devotional service to the Lord. First and foremost of such devotional engagements is hearing about Krishna. This is a very powerful transcendental method for purging the mind of all misgivings. The more one hears about Krishna, the more one becomes enlightened and detached from everything that draws the mind away from Krishna. By detaching the mind from activities not devoted to the Lord, one can very easily learn vairagya. Vairagya means detachment from matter and engagement of the mind and spirit. Personal spiritual detachment is more difficult than attaching the mind to the activities of Krishna. This is practical because by hearing about Krishna, one becomes automatically attached to the Supreme Spirit. This attachment is called Paresh Anubhava, spiritual satisfaction. It is just like the feeling of satisfaction a hungry man has for every morsel of food he eats. The more one eats while hungry, the more one feels satisfaction and strength. Similarly, by discharging devotional service, one feels transcendental satisfaction in the mind, becomes detached from material objectives. Similarly, by discharging devotional service, one feels transcendental satisfaction as the mind becomes detached from material objectives. It is something like curing a disease by expert treatment and appropriate diet. Hearing of the transcendental activities of Lord Krishna is therefore expert treatment for the mad mind, and eating the foodstuff offered to Krishna is the appropriate diet for the suffering patient. This treatment is the process of Krishna consciousness. So the text again. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Maya Asamchayam Mahabaho Manodur Nigraham Shalam Abhyasena Dukunteya Vairagena Chagriyate. Lord Shri Krishna said, Almighty Arm, son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but is possible by suitable practice and detachment. Srila Prabhupada once said that this Krishna consciousness philosophy is most exacting, persistent, and voluminous due to the unbreakable system of disciple succession. The fact that it's the most exacting, scientific, voluminous, and consistent is something we have to examine when we're reading Bhagavad Gita. Our first step is just to try to hear, as Prabhupada says here. Now, in the age of Satya Yuga, it is said, Krite Tadayato Vishnu, that there is no question of just hearing once or many times. One could hear the message once in the Gurukul and remember it for the rest of one's life. Of course, as time went on, the Gurukuls had to become more strict. In other words, there was a certain amount of austerity that Krishna mentions in the Srimad Bhagavatam concerning what a brahmachari would do. As he says, brahmachari gurukule vasandanta rita asavan dasavan nicho surida saurida guru sarida sudrida and sarida. That the brahmachari would live in the Gurukul and would learn how to become a dasavan, just like a servant. Now, in modern age, this is considered to be terrible. Matter of fact, in many countries, if one had children living in the Gurukul like a servant, the guru would be arrested for enslaving child labor. Even if Krishna, he'd go out with Sudama and collect firewood for the ashram, in spite of whatever difficulty he'd have to endure. So that the police nowadays would be informed about that. Probably Sandipani Muni would be arrested with his wife, and Krishna and Sudama would be sent to an orphanage. But that's not the way it was so many thousands of years ago. So we have the situation where we're offered the Bhagavad Gita so that we can listen to it and find out what is our current position. For instance, Krishna begins with explaining that we're spiritual beings now within a material body. And Krishna explains about the mechanism of how our conditioning works. And he explains it in 700 verses. Who we are, who Krishna is, how the material nature is working, Prakriti, how karma is working, how time is working. So when we have a verse like this, we can try to, as Prabhupada said, after hearing the verse, after reading Bhagavad Gita, we could try to assimilate the knowledge so that we can actually see what it's talking about. Now, if we don't try to do that, then every time we read Bhagavad Gita, every verse we read, we'll think it's somehow or another separate from the other verses. That chapter 5, chapter 4, chapter 3, chapter 2, and chapter 1 are somehow or another separated from the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And the subsequent chapters from then on are somehow or another introducing other philosophy or other ideas. And therefore we may go on reading Bhagavad Gita for hundreds of years and not understand what Bhagavad Gita is telling us, or how to practically apply it within our lives. So, for instance, in this particular verse, Arjuna has some problem. Now, we think poor Arjuna had a problem, and we're sympathetic, he had a problem. we will forget the fact that the premise of Bhagavad Gita is that Arjuna really didn't have a problem. We have a problem. And because we have a problem, Krishna arranged it 5,000 years ago that Arjuna could listen to Krishna so that Arjuna could take our position and solve our problem. And here Arjuna is explaining that his problem is that his mind is not controlled. Now, what does it mean? Arjuna's mind wasn't controlled. Does it mean he couldn't sit in front of a candle and look at it for 3 days without stopping? That may be one aspect of mind control. But ultimately, we find out at the end of Bhagavad Gita that the mind can only be controlled when it actually is experiencing, as Prabhupada writes here, Pareshanubhava, spiritual satisfaction. And the only spiritual satisfaction is when, as we find out in the Nectar of Devotion, that smartavyak sadatam Vishnu, vismartak jatu nakinchit, sarva vidi nisedyasyur, etayar eva kinkara. That everything we're reading, everything we're doing, is ultimately to help us always remember Krishna and never forget him. Now that will only be possible when we come to the platform of Prema Bhakti. When we remember Krishna as Raghunath Das Goswami in the Vilap Kushamandri writes, because Vilap Kushamandri comes after other books that Sri Raghunath Das Goswami has written, such as Manasya Shiksha, which is a treatise, very elaborate treatise about how not to get tricked by the mind and how to engage the mind in Krishna's service. Because even we come to the platform of somehow or another not becoming tricked apparently by Maya, it doesn't mean we've reached perfection yet. Perfection is when we actually are in the full spiritual consciousness at the stage of Prema Bhakti, but even Bhava Bhakti, when we're actually able to experience Krishna directly to some degree or another. Not to the same degree as in Prema Bhakti when we personally meet Krishna, but at least Bhava Bhakti, we get glimpses of actually what Krishna looks like, what Krishna sounds like, what he smells like, etc. When our spiritual senses are awakened, so that we actually are living as our actual identity as a spiritual being. Now our consciousness we have a little consciousness of the fact that we're souls, especially that may be awakened more when we hear the fact that we are souls, that we're conscious beings in an unconscious body. But we may not be that conscious of Krishna. Now, the Varna Ashram system is meant to gradually bring one from the stage of 4 stages. The physical stage, the mental stage, the intellectual stage, the freedom from the false ego, to the spiritual platform. And Krishna has explained this in many different ways. And here is explaining it as 2 things, abhyasena and vairagya. Now, previously, in the 7th chapter, Krishna will explain it in a slightly different way. He says, Chaturvida bhajante mam janasakritina arjuna, arte jignasya artarthi gyani cha paratarshava. There are 4 kinds a pious people approach Krishna. What does pious mean? Pious means that one is willing to follow Krishna's instruction, some instruction. Generally speaking, people do not follow Krishna's instructions very much. Of course, the example of those who don't follow Krishna's instructions at all are the lower species of life. For instance, if we ask an animal not to eat meat, we ask a tiger not to eat meat because, according to scripture, a civilized person doesn't eat meat, and we try to preach to the tiger, if you want to become civilized, please give up your bad habit of killing animals. I don't think any of us are so powerful in our preaching that we'll be able to convince the tiger not to eat meat. As a matter of fact, if we try to do it too closely, if we get too close to the tiger, he might eat us. And our preaching will not only be a failure, but we'll also have to wind up in another body. So, animals don't accrue karma for eating meat. The tiger, we can't tell the tiger that if you keep on eating meat, you'll go to hell, because he's already been to hell. That's how we got the form of a tiger. There's no need to preach to a tiger that you're doing sinful activity, because for a tiger, eating meat is not a sinful activity. But for a human being to eat like a tiger, that means that in his next lifetime, he stands a chance of getting a body like that of a tiger, which is not very desirable. Therefore, Krishna says in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he defines what piety is. Now, most people in society will be very much shocked to hear Krishna's explanation of piety. Most people think if you help a little old lady across the street, that you're being pious. Of course, if you help the little old lady across the street and she has a gun in her purse and she goes into the bank and robs the bank, then not only the little old lady will go to hell for her sinful activity, but you'll also go to hell with her for assisting her in the robbery. Although superficially, it may appear that you're doing a very nice deed, but actually the activity is actually sinful. So any activity which is not done in Krishna consciousness, to one degree or another, entails some kind of illusion or a sinful activity. Now, we can't help but to a certain extent be an illusion, because that's how we got this body. But we can get out of the body if we understand the mechanism of how to get out of illusion. Therefore, Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says, Trivida narakasedam dvaram nashitam atmanaha kama krodha tata lobhas tasmat etam triyam chaget. That there are three gates leading to hell: lust, anger, and greed. That every sane person should become free from these three gates because they lead to the degradation of the self. Or as Prahladananda said, actually in this world, we have no enemy except for the mind which is not engaged in Krishna's service, which he said is the uncontrolled mind. Now Krishna explains how we can understand if we're conquering the mind. And there he tells Arjuna, Yakshastrim vidim istrija vartate kamakarata asasidim avatnoti nasukam aparam gatim. There he says, we have a choice. Yakshastrim vidim ustrija. We have a choice. Either we accept Shastra and follow it, or we'll be forced to follow the dictation of lust, anger, and greed. There's no middle realm. Even if we merge in Brahman, according to Shastra, arurukritena parampadam tada, yenye aravindaksha vimuktamaninas padastabhava avishuddha buddhaya. Even we merge in Brahman and realize we're eternal, we're still, in the eyes of Shastra, we're still fools, covered by illusion. Because we're not just Brahman, we're Krishna's eternal servants. To find out that we're not this body is certainly progress, but it's not sufficient. We have to find out who we actually are. And Shastra tells us who we are. Shastra says that we're eternally dasa, dasa, anudasa. We're eternally servants of the servants of the servant of Krishna. That's the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. And when we don't accept that, then we have a problem. If we don't accept that, then either we're engaged in vikarmic activities, just following lust, anger, and greed, or even as devotees, aspiring devotees, if we don't understand that we're aspiring devotees and we think we're devotees and therefore free to act as we want at times. In other words, there was a character named Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a book. And in the novel, sometimes Dr. Jekyll, or Mr. Hyde, I guess, I don't know who, I didn't read the book, but I just know about it. That sometimes he was a very nice person, and sometimes he was a very bad person. So we should understand we have a tendency to be nice when we take shelter in Krishna consciousness, and we have a tendency to be not so nice when we don't realize our dependency upon Krishna and take shelter of him. And the results of that sometimes is we find ourselves in a very unpleasant position. But that's actually to inspire us to become nice again, or to avoid the things that cause us to be in a not so nice position. So that first steps are, generally everyone takes shelter of Krishna at the beginning because we're in distress. And in Kali Yuga, how is it possible for anyone not to be in distress? Unless you're living on a deserted island with plenty of fruit trees on it, with no internet connection, plenty of prasadam, and no communication. Otherwise, the whole material world, from their spraying the sky with chemicals, to the wars that are going on, to whatever they're putting into the so-called food, to the contaminated water, to the lack of everyone walking around as an illusion, thinking that they're their body, and that most people in the world are their enemy, and a few people are their friends. In such a state of mind, how can one be peaceful? And if one is not peaceful, Krishna says, how is it possible anyone could be happy? So at the beginning, we approach Krishna consciousness because we're in distress. That's normal. Of course, nowadays, at least in some countries, if you walk down the street and you say hello to someone, you're supposed to smile. How are you? Pajavaisya. Harasho. Ochin harasho. Great. Atlichna. Really? Everything's all right? Yeah, my father died today. My wife ran away with the children. I lost my job. I was diagnosed with cancer. I'm going to die in 3 weeks. How are you? Lichna, I'm great. So, as they say in Spain, if there's a fire in your house, then the remedy is to close the shades so no one sees it. The neighbors don't see it. So in modern society, everyone is trying to put on the show that everything's all right, although people are suffering greatly. Therefore, when people suffer enough due to their sinful activities, especially the unlimited propagation of the encouragement to have illicit sex. Now, people may give up meat eating. They may even become a vegetarian. They may even become a vegan, whatever they become. Because that's also, to a lesser extent, sinful. But still, they're not engaged in the most sinful activity, which is cow slaughter. Someone may give up even intoxication, which is kind of rare. And someone may give up gambling. Of course, they won't give up mental speculation. But illicit sex, this is as Prabhupada in one initiation, when he gave the devotee the beads, well, he asked them to tell what are the four regular principles, and the devotee said the four regular principles. And then at the end, Prabhupada said, well, which one do you like the most? So the material world is based upon Maituni Bhava. So it's very difficult to give up this desire, either gross sex life or subtle profit, adoration, distinction. And because of that, we suffer. Because Maya, we may be very liberal and tell everyone, please do whatever you like. We still love you anyhow. But Maya loves us also. And as soon as we become attached to any form of sense gratification, gross or subtle, even the desire for profit, the desire for distinction, the proper desire for profit, adoration, be loved and worshipped. Maya is not so forgiving. She puts us in illusion. Krishna Bahirmukha Bhogavanchatare, that as soon as Maya sees Krishna Bahirmukha Bhogavanchatare, that we've turned our face away from Krishna even for a second, Maya sta tare japati dare. Then Maya puts us in illusion immediately. We don't have to wait. Maya, I think I've forgotten Krishna. And next week, Maya says, yes, I've noted it. Now it's time to be an illusion. No, immediately, we're already in illusion. She just puts us in more illusion. That's all. So that's distressful. As soon as we forget that we're eternal, we're in distress because there's so many different problems going on. Just like that man who was walking in the forest and a tiger started to chase him. Luckily, he climbed into a tree to escape the tiger. And he climbed onto a branch of the tree because the tiger was trying to climb up on the tree, but the branch broke. And he almost hit the tiger when he fell down, but luckily he landed into a hole. Unfortunately, in the hole, there were venomous snakes, and they were all climbing up to bite him. But luckily, on the other side and the tiger was climbing down the hole to eat him. That was a rather difficult situation. But luckily, a man on the other side of the hole, beyond the reach of the tiger, came with a rope to help him climb out of the hole. to get out of the hole. Unfortunately, the man in the hole said that I'd gladly take hold of the rope so I can be pulled out. When I fell into the hole, both my arms and legs were all broken. So the man on the other side with the rope said, well, why don't you grab hold of the rope with your teeth and I'll pull you out by your teeth. So the man said, I'd like to do that. But when I fell down into the hole, there was a bee's nest of venomous Amazonian bees that the hive fell on my head. And now all the bees are stinging me. But luckily for me, some of the honey from this wonderful hive is leaked out of the hive and is now on my forehead. And soon he'll reach the tip of my nose. And if I wait just a little bit longer, and some of that honey is going to come into my mouth, and that will be wonderful. So that's material world. In spite of all difficulty, we're willing to undergo all kinds of suffering just for one drop of honey. So, vairagya or abhyasana means that in spite of the fact that we're attached to the material world and interested in sense gratification, at least we know that these four sinful activities, at least grossly, we have to restrain from them and learn how to gradually control our mind by placing it on that particular activity, for us known as sadhana bhakti. Now, in the Varnashram system, those who are trying to come free from distress, they were called Shudras. Shudra means that they're crying all the time, lamenting. Why are they lamenting? Because of the reactions to their sinful activities. But at least they've understood that they must do activities in a regulated way so they can become free from suffering. In other words, that regulation is to serve the higher castes, the Vaishyas who protect the cows, the Kshatriyas who protect the citizens, and the Brahmins who protect everyone else and help elevate them. So ourselves, we may have a tendency to lament. Still, if we perform sadhana bhakti and try to fix the mind upon Krishna, then gradually that lamentation will go away. As long as we agree to not only externally follow the regular principles, but try also to internally give up our misconceptions that we need more than what we have, or we don't have what we need, etc., etc. That may be true, but at least when we're chanting japa, it's not the time to make plans for solving our material problems. If one is able to do that, to a certain extent, give up this tendency, regulate our activities, sadhana. That's called for us abhyasana. There's an element of vairagya there, but it's not very strong. Therefore, it's called karma yoga. As Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavad Gita, that in the same chapter there, Prabhupada says, in the beginning, one performs karma yoga. We do our devotional service, we do our sadhana. We're not so detached, we're somewhat detached from these sinful activities, and we're trying to attach ourselves to Krishna. So that's very nice. And by such activity, then we come to the platform of becoming somewhat purified. And that purification, is, Krishna says, is through shanti. We get satisfaction. Any devotee who's been practicing for any amount of time, if they look back on what their life was like before they became a devotee, they'll realize that their whole life was hankering and lamenting, without any other activity other than that. But now, sometimes we may fall into hankering or lamentation, but still we have an alternative. We know I can pick up my japa beads, chant Hare Krishna, and it'll go away. I can read Prabhupada's books, or I come to the worship of the deity. We have a process by which we can become free from the afflictions of our minds by doing some activity which will actually counteract it. Now, when one becomes free from such lamentation, then one may actually realize how to improve one's life. Not only try to avoid problematic activities. For instance, Prabhupada said when someone comes to the movement, you should feed them so much prasadam that they waddle like a duck. What's the word for duck in Russian? Does anyone know the word for duck in Russian? Anyhow, whatever it is. Anyhow, they should...
Утка, Махарадж, утка. Duck, утка.
That they'll waddle like a duck, which means that they won't be able to think of anything else except for the prasadam in their stomach. Or as it says in Spanish, barriga llena, corazón contento. When the stomach's full, the heart is pleased. So the beginning is like that, but after 20, 30 years in the movement, if you're still just waddling like a duck, it's not a very good sign. Now, the next stage is that as one becomes purified, one understands that I should regulate my activities. I should eat the proper food. Generally, the diet in the temple. Anyone who could survive in the temple for a number of years. I don't think most of us don't live in a temple. But generally, ISKCON temple diet used to be, or still is in some places, mostly sugar and ghee. And the phrase was, just eat, it's prasad. So we have experienced that in our movement, I've never heard of any devotee dying from not having sufficient prasadam. But I have heard of cases, devotees dying from eating prasadam, too much of it, the wrong kind of it. So pure ghee is nice, pure sugar is not so good all the time. But therefore, one learns I should have a healthy diet. I should regulate my life. I should even learn how to breathe air, which is a novel understanding of how to live life in the material world, to actually learn how to breathe. I should actually have nice relationships with the devotees. Now that I got initiated, all my sinful reactions have been taken away. Now I'm free to offend anyone I want because I'm pure. And if there's any problem, then my spiritual master is so kind, he's agreed to take all the sinful reactions from me. So if there's any offense, the reaction goes to him. And I periodically give him donations to pay for the hospital bill. So we have a nice relationship. Now, on the second stage of abhyasena, one is still engaged in devotional service in a regulated way, but one is more regulated. And one also learns how to take care of the body better, take care of the relationships better, understands how to live more simple and natural life in Krishna consciousness. Then those devotees are called Vaishyas. Well, not Vaishyas, the devotees aren't called Vaishyas, but in the Varnashram system, That's the Vaishyas. They know that the real value of life is clean air, fresh water, pure food, nice relationships with others, like Vrindavan and the residents of Vrindavan. Now, at that stage, there's more vairagya, but it's mostly external activities. But when one becomes a little bit more purified and understands a little more clear that we're spiritual beings and solves the external material problems, then one goes a little bit more deeper into trying to solve our internal problems. And that's called vairagya. Then when at the stage of vairagya, one becomes interested in jnana yoga. One becomes more fixed in hearing. One does not only by duty come to class or chant their rounds, it actually becomes one is more enthusiastic to do it. One actually wants to understand things as they are, realize it as they are. Therefore, one becomes more interested in hearing, and by that hearing, one realizes more and more the things that distract us from Krishna consciousness. One is not so much interested in finding out the latest news all the time and finding out what all one's friends, what they did the last week. One actually becomes more interested in Krishna's pastimes in this material world and in the spiritual world than in the pastimes of our friends, our relatives, our country, etc. So that's called vairagya, hearing, but with more detachment. And with the idea of focusing the mind more on Krishna. And when one actually becomes purified and realizes that one is not the body to a greater extent, that activity of dedicating oneself purely to activities of Krishna consciousness becomes more prominent, and one's detachment from anything that draws the mind away from Krishna becomes more prominent. Then the next stage is this parenushabhava, that one develops taste for hearing about Krishna. One can actually feel Krishna's presence. When one chants Hare Krishna, one can see what's being explained in the Bhagavad Gita. One hears Bhagavad Gita. One can understand the value of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, that it's not some just philosophy, it's life, it's real life and existence. So Krishna tells Arjuna, he sympathizes that it's very difficult to curb the mind, the restless mind. But it's impossible without suitable practice, without sadhana bhakti and engagement in devotional service. It's impossible to even make any progress. What to speak of coming to the platform of pure vairagya, where one is on the platform of indifference to material things, and as it says, Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati, that to get Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he heard from Ramananda Roy about what the process of becoming Krishna conscious is, Ramananda Roy told Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jnane Priyasam Udapasta Nimanta Eva, that give up this speculative tendency. Jnane Priyasam Udapasta Nimanta Eva. Put it aside for some time. What's going to happen tomorrow? All the problems that happened yesterday. Just put it aside, Ramananda Roy said. This is actually quoting from Lord Brahma. And what should we do? Jnane Priyasam Udapasta Nimanta Eva. Jivanti Sanmukaritam Bhavadiya Vartam. Just try to listen, that's all. That's all we have to do. Listen to the right source. And what will they tell us? How do we know it's the right source? Well, they'll tell us is stane sthita. Don't try to change your position. As the mad human society nowadays in some parts of the world, they're trying to make men into women and women into men. Or nowadays, the newest fad is they're trying to make some human beings want to become dogs. They're dressing up as dogs. And they're going to the park dressed in their dog outfit and playing with other dogs. And they only eat dog food. And they live their whole life in a dog suit. So this is not advised by Lord Brahma or by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or by Ramananda Roy. Stane sthita. Just whatever body we're in, it's sufficient. We don't have to change it. Whatever duties we have, we don't have to change them, just perform them. But what should we do? Shruti Gatam. We should hear Krishna and his representatives. Those are repeating the same message as Krishna. And then what should we do after hearings? We should engage stane sthita, shruti gatam, tanu with the body, mano with the mind, no vir with the intelligence. Engage them in Krishna's service. And what can we expect? Stane sthita, shruti gatam, tanuvang mano vir, ye priyasa, by such endeavor, dita ditop taisti lokyam, then Krishna becomes softened, his heart becomes softened, because it's already softened. And then he reveals himself to such a devotee in proportion to one's surrender. So if we hear in the right way, and we try to follow what we heard, then Krishna will be pleased and reveal himself to us. And therefore, our minds will automatically become purified and attracted to Krishna. So by our process, we get simultaneously, if we follow this process that Prabhupada has given us on behalf of our acharyas, and we follow it sincerely, then the result is that we automatically get vairagya, and abhyasa and vairagya will automatically come. This is Sutta Goswami's message to the sages of Naimisharanya, that by devotional service automatically causes knowledge, attachment, follow. We don't have to add anything, we don't have to subtract anything, but we can utilize things in Krishna's service. And if we sincerely try to do that and follow the process of sadhana bhakti, then Krishna will be pleased with us and our life will become perfect. Now, here is explained about the Ashtanga Yoga process, but obviously there is only one process. It's called Bhakti Yoga, of which Ashtanga Yoga is one of the processes to help us come to the platform of Bhakti Yoga. Whether we perform sadhana bhakti, which is possible in this age, process of chanting the holy names specifically, hearing about Krishna specifically, or we perform the other processes to engage the mind in Krishna's service, which in the beginning is indirect, and then later on becomes more direct. But these other processes are just not possible in this age. We'll try to learn by the Ashtanga Yoga system, practice and learn vairagya is just impossible in this age for most people. But the result is the same. We practice sadhana bhakti, sincerely try to practice properly, focus our attention and give our love to Krishna as the best we can. Then gradually we'll improve our sadhana bhakti. Krishna promises us that. He says, Tesham sadatam yuktanam bhajantam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayantite. For those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love. So that's abhyasena. That's our process. Try to constantly serve Krishna and serve him with love. Love means vairagya. Love Krishna and focus our mind on Krishna and give our love to him, and then automatically vairagya will be there. And what does Krishna says? Dadami buddhi yogam tam. As much as we engage in our sadhana, as much as we engage in our service, as much as we try to pay attention and give our love to Krishna, and Krishna will help us by giving us intelligence by which we can come to him. Krishna is in our heart eternally. We can never leave Krishna, and he'll immediately reciprocate with us for any sincere desire to serve him, any sincere effort to serve him. So we should remember that and not become discouraged by externally what's going on in the world or by our own personal situation. We should know that this is all arranged to try to inspire us to take shelter of Krishna. And if we see things properly and do that, then Krishna will help us in every respect, and gradually we'll make progress to revive our relationship with him. And therefore we'll feel at least in the beginning, some satisfaction, and eventually we'll experience ecstasy. It's like a child. When a child is learning to walk, naturally the child will not in the beginning know how to walk, and the child will fall down. Now the parents generally don't criticize the child when it's, I don't know what age they learn how to walk, 2 years old. If the child falls down when it's trying to walk, when it's 1 or 2 years old, the parents don't start criticizing the child. You rascal. It took me 3 attempts to walk. You're already on your 4th. You're not worthy to be part of our family. No, the parents are generally quite patient. And eventually the child will learn how to walk. Of course, if the child is 50 years old, he's not a child anymore, and he still hasn't learned how to walk, there may be some concern. But generally the parents are patient for some time. And then after the child learns how to walk, eventually he'll dance in ecstasy in Krishna consciousness. That's what he's taught. So we may not be perfect, but the process is perfect, and we follow it, then we will become perfect by the grace of Krishna and his representatives and our sincere endeavor to get their grace. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much for the class. You say almost at the end that we should not feel discouraged for the external situations. And in theory, sounds good, but in the practical speaking, when we have to worry about the basics, I'm talking not only on my behalf, but on the behalf of many devotees that are struggling for the basics. How can we perform our sadhana better when we have to struggle for the basics? It is a little difficult. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit difficult. Yeah.
Krishna,
you can elaborate please on this. We really appreciate it.
It's meant to be difficult. If it was easy, we wouldn't get any credit. If you're learning how to lift weights, then if you lift 2 kilograms, you don't get much credit for it. You have to start with a weight that you can lift. And if you lift that much weight, then gradually you'll get stronger. So there may be some difficulties we face. We may not pass the test so easily. But the real test is we keep on doing our sadhana and try to make an effort to concentrate. It is not that it is all Krishna's mercy. We don't have to make any effort. Our only advancement is we show an effort, which is our sincerity, to try to actually reach Krishna. So if we are faced with many problems, at least we should try to keep on our sadhana, keep on chanting Hare Krishna, and try to pay attention, and then Krishna will assist us. But if we think it's too much of an effort to make an effort, then who can help us? If we only lift 2 kilos trying to improve our strength, and we do that for 20 years, and we wonder why we're not getting stronger, is because we're not really making the effort. So we have to show Krishna. And therefore, showing Krishna means that we have to face difficulties. We're always facing difficulties with or without Krishna consciousness. But in the midst of the difficulties, we have to make an effort. And then Krishna will help. And if we make no effort, then Krishna can't help us, because we don't want Krishna to help us. Anastasia?
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj.
Харе Кришна, Гуру Махарадж. Я хотела задать вопрос по поводу того, что мы склонны впадать в иллюзию. И если мы хотим служить Господу на алтаре и что-то для этого хотим приобрести, но при этом есть какие-то трудности и препятствия, то является ли это тоже как уловкой Майи на то, что что-то, может, настроение не то? То есть является ли это иллюзией, даже несмотря на то, что мы хотим что-то сделать для Кришны?
Okay, so Maharaj, we have a tendency to be illusioned. So even if sometimes we're doing something that is for example, we want to serve Krishna on the altar, but we're missing some item. So we're making extraneous activities to obtain this item. Would that still be considered that we're doing this under the illusion, even though our aspirations could be deemed as spiritual?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me with the earphones on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Let me just make sure the iPod's used. I'm gonna have to turn my camera off for a second. No, it's not there. Can you hear me? It's working now? Can you hear me?
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Okay,
Yes, we can hear you.
so I'll be right back. I just take a moment. So one time, Srila Prabhupada was walking with Giriraj Maharaj, and Prabhupada made a philosophical point. And then Giriraj Maharaj turned to Prabhupada and said, "Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada. I was in Maya." And Prabhupada started to laugh, and he said, "You were in Maya. You're always in Maya." So we should understand that right now we're covered by the illusory energy. And how do we know that? Because we think we're this body or this mind. But that doesn't mean that's the end of the story, because if we remember Krishna, then gradually real knowledge and detachment comes. So when we're doing our service, we should do it in a humble way, understanding that it's not that I'm a great devotee, and therefore I'm personally dealing with the deities, for instance. We should understand that by the mercy of our acharyas and disciple succession and Guru and Krishna and the other devotees, I've been given an opportunity to serve Krishna. And therefore, I have to try to do it to the best of my ability. Srila Prabhupada, when he was installing Rukmini Dwarkadish in Los Angeles, actually Rukmini Dwarkanath, he mentioned that Sanatana Goswami was hanging his deity in a tree. But Sanatana Goswami was an old man, and he can only obtain some dried rotis, half-baked pieces of bread to offer to Madan Mohan. So one day Madan Mohan became a little disturbed because he wasn't used to eating such austere food every day, day after day. So he complained to Sanatana Goswami that every day you're just giving me this dry roti, this dry piece of bread to eat. It's half-baked. Can't you even beg a little salt and give me a little salt with it? So Sanatana Goswami said to Madan Mohan, he said, I'm an old man. I can hardly move. But whatever I have, I offer to you. So please kindly accept it. So Prabhupada started to laugh. And he said, actually, Madan Mohan, he had to accept it because his bhakta was offering it with love. But then Prabhupada said, but what is your value? What is the value of the things that you have? He said, it's nothing. That the real thing is bhakti. And then Prabhupada said, he said that, my dear Krishna, I brought this for you. I have no qualification. I'm rotten and fallen. And then Prabhupada started to cry, but I brought it for you. And Prabhupada said, don't be puffed up. Always remember that you're dealing with Krishna. That is my advice to you. Thank you. So we do the best we can. We should always be humble. If we make mistakes, we should try to correct them. But we shouldn't think that I've done a perfect arti, or I've done some perfect service, and therefore I deserve so much for it. We should always remain humble and realize that only by the grace of our acharyas and Krishna and our spiritual master and the other devotees that we can do any service at all. And therefore, we should forgive other people's mistakes to the best we can. And at the same time, we should try to correct our mistakes so we can do our service better. Then we'll make some progress in devotional service. Okay. Hvala or Spasiba Bolshoi. Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Gaur Premanande Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for the translation of Angalata Devidasi. Spasiba Parivochaka.
Hare Krishna Guru.
Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Prahladananda Maharaj Ji.
Jai.
Thank you so much, Kumari.
Харе Кришна, дорогие преданные. Всем спасибо за встречу.